screen, Paul? Is it actually started? Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to North Cumbria Clinical Commissioning Group governing body. I'm really pleased that today we have actually gone out there and asked members of the public to actually join us on this network. So that's really important to us. I know during the pandemic that we haven't been able to do that, so a number of meetings have been held to say just internally within the CCG, but the minutes and the papers have all been published, but this time we have got people here. So I'm really pleased that there are members of the public here. I just wanted to sort of do a couple of reminders before I get into the actual agenda. But firstly, just remind people that it is being recorded, so that everything you say all right will be, to say, picked up. I've got a section for questions at the end of the meeting from either members of the public that are present, or indeed as well, we have had some questions sent to us, which has been very useful actually. It's been very helpful that to try and just maybe read them out. And if the people are here present as well, make sure I'll read out the full question. And there are some responses that we've already done. So we'll get that at the end of the meeting. One of the other things I just wanted to say as well is just to make sure that people keep the microphones muted. I know a lot of people on this call will be already used to doing that on this kind of software in this facility, but we'll keep muted. And it is, as I always say in our public meetings, this is a governing body which is held in public. It is not necessarily a public meeting. Hence why I say that the area for questions for the public to engage with us will be at the end on the agenda item. So one of the other things I'll do is to try and avoid over talking between people. I will, if you just let me introduce either by way of the hands for the governing body members. And bear in mind, I can't see everybody on the screen, of course, so I only get like a selected panel of 9. But let me try and introduce you as we're going through any questions or comments that people want to make in relation to any of the items on the agenda. So I know people within the governing body are used to that, but obviously just try and display a little bit more of that rigour. Yeah, I just think we'll get going. So just in terms of the actual agenda today, is there any apologies, Brenda, that you've got for us that you know about?
Yeah, Sue Stevenson from Health Watcher Centre apologies, and Peter Scott from NCIC, the interim chair.
So other than that, at the moment, do we have all our colleagues present? Peter's here, so that's okay. So
yes, Gareth and Helen, they've all joined.
Yeah, okay. Well, welcome as well, because obviously there are some relatively new governing body members. We will touch on that later on, but Ed Tallis and Helen and Gareth in terms of the 2 GPs who are new as well. So welcome again. I think this will be your second governing body meeting. Just in terms of the next item there, then, as regards declarations of interest, I think there are 2 declarations specifically to items on the agenda. That's for Ed Tallis and that's for Louise Mason Lodge. And that's in relation to the item on the governance report number 7, whereby we're talking about making some changes for recommendation to the Constitution and some internal changes as well to that Constitution for us to approve. In my opinion, their presence does not hinder that whatsoever, and they can take part in the discussion when we come to that, because that's for approval. But as I've indicated previously, for Ed's role, and it will come out in that discussion item, that Ed can't be a voting member until he's fully approved by the full council members. And when I say I come on to that item, I'll explain that will take place tonight. So when we come to that, Ed won't be voting. So just wanted to make that, and that's the way of managing that, Brenda, in terms of that conflict on there. So I'm quite happy with that. So next item I just wanted to touch on was the meeting minutes for the governing body on the 15th of September. Is there anything from anybody in those meeting minutes in terms of accuracy that they want to pick up, please? So I'll go through page by page. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay. I'm not seeing any hands up. So in terms of that, in terms of accuracy, we'll accept those. Just so people realise who are on the call, if you see me turning to what is my left, but it might look different for you, I'm actually looking at another screen just where I've got all the papers on. So just if I'm not looking directly at the screen, that's the reason why. So just in relation then to any matters arising and or actions from this, we do have one particular action on the action sheet, and that was for Julie and Christine to liaise with CHOC to gather patient feedback on video conferencing appointments through the Attend Anywhere system. So Julie, I just wanted to say, there's no markup on that. Is there anything you want to just update us on that, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to update you that we have had some conversations with CHOC, particularly with Richie McGregor, that's led a lot of this work, who's been fantastically helpful. He shared the patient feedback that they collect. They do that at the end of every consultation, give people the option to provide specific feedback. And sort of 2 things out of it, really. One, it reflects very much the patient feedback that we were talking about at the last meeting around the patient survey that we did, and that some people do really love it, but there are some people it doesn't really work for, and I think that's just kind of useful corroboration of that. And there were some particularly interesting things around savings, not just in travel, but also generally in time, but also things like making sure you've got childcare for the appointments that were being reviewed. I've also had a very brief contact with you to say that we need to, at some point, tie all of this together and just do a bit with the community, so through the media, around the growing use of remote consultation and how we're gathering feedback to make sure we're improving that experience for both the patient and the clinicians as it continues to develop.
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. And I know you also as well did send some sort of information back to Brenda, which we'll include in the markup as well there.
No problem.
You put that down in writing as well. Well, thanks for that, Julie. Is there anything else on terms of matters arising from those minutes that is not on the agenda or we've not discussed in terms of that action that people want to raise before I move on to the next item? Okay, so I'm going to go on to COVID-19 updates, and we have put it as verbal. And the reason why we do it as verbal at the moment is because some things change so quickly that to have a report which may or may not be static at a certain point in time sometimes doesn't give us that full picture. So we have regularly asked Peter just to give us a verbal update where we are with COVID-19. So I'm going to hand over to you, Peter, just to give us the usual key points regarding where we are with the pandemic.
Thank you, Chair. I'll get through the update, and then if there are questions colleagues want to pick up, I'll try and address those after I've given the briefing. So by way of reminder, there are very strong partnership arrangements across Cumbria around responding to the pandemic. So the Local Resilience Forum, which involves all local partners, including the local government, the NHS, social care, public health, the business community, the constabulary, and so on. That's meeting regularly and is chaired by the Assistant Chief Constable from Cumbria Constabulary, and is giving very good leadership to all of the COVID issues, including enforcement, communication, the impact on the health service, etc. There is a weekly health protection board, which is chaired by the Director of Public Health, and is charged with really looking at all of the case numbers, the outbreak control processes, and so on. And when that meets each week, it actually meets on a Thursday morning, it looks at the case numbers that have occurred over the last week and tracks the rates and the development of the pandemic in Cumbria. That report does subsequently become publicly available, but I don't think that the report for today is yet in the public domain. So I'm anxious not to do that, because the right process is through the Health Protection Board. But in terms of the case numbers in North Cumbria, broadly, they're tracking somewhere between 200 and 220 cases per week per 100,000, new cases per week per 100,000 population. Compared to a national position in England, which is closer to 270 new cases per week per 100,000 population. So what that means is, Cumbria, we still have got lower weekly new case rates than the England average. There's been quite encouraging, so room for early optimism. There's been some quite encouraging changes, particularly in the case rates in Carlisle. So Carlisle district for a while was tracking higher than the national average, which was the key determinant for Carlisle being placed in tier 2 in advance of the new national lockdown arrangements and restriction arrangements obviously superseded that. So although the virus is still very present in all of our communities, there is community transmission. The positive news is that currently the number of new case rates in North Cumbria is lower than the national England average and significantly lower than the rates that have occurred in large parts of the northwest and indeed the northeast. In terms of the reproduction rate, nationally, the most recent information is that that is somewhere between 1 and 1.2, which is also a reduction. And the indication is that in the northwest, which is where Cumbria is included in these figures, the reproduction rate is somewhere between 0.9 and 1.1. And obviously, a key aim for everybody is to reduce the R rate below 1, meaning that the scale of the virus would then start to reduce. The virus is clearly having an impact on the delivery of local services. So there are outbreaks in a number of residential and nursing homes. Louise may want to clarify on that later if there are questions that need to be picked up. And there are significant numbers of people with active COVID virus in our local district general hospitals and one of the community hospitals. And broadly, the percentage of beds occupied by people with COVID in our hospital is comparable with the position across the northeast and northwest. That does change on a day-by-day basis, of course. The next thing that I wanted to briefly cover is everybody will have seen all of the national media coverage around the development of vaccines. So there are currently two vaccines which have received significant media coverage, having an initial demonstration of not only safety but also efficacy and possibly even effectiveness. And it is likely that there will be more vaccines that emerge over the next few weeks that similarly have got positive phase 3 trials. So this is just fantastic news. I think for a long time, many people, me included, had a lot of caution about whether a vaccine would be developed that was viable, that was safe and would have an impact on the whole population. So all the indications are very, very positive. And we should just admire and applaud the amazing scientific efforts that have taken place to develop those vaccines and the contribution that members of the public have made by being willing to be a participant in the various trials. The NHS is gearing up, very strongly gearing up, to be able to deliver the vaccine once it is available. So I think we do need to exercise some caution that these vaccines are not yet fully approved. They are not yet available for use, but the NHS is doing everything it reasonably can to be prepared so that we can begin delivery of the vaccine programme once those vaccines are available. There's very strong coordination work that for the North East and North Cumbria is led by the Newcastle Hospital Trust. So there's an NHS organisation in each of the sub-regions which is charged with leading the coordination around the vaccine delivery. That's supported by a North East and North Cumbria seasonal flu board, which is now also being expanded to include preparation for the delivery of the COVID vaccine. And locally in North Cumbria, we've done the same thing of expanding the seasonal flu vaccination board to include COVID vaccine preparation. From a CCG perspective, there's been a lot of work over the last week, literally the last week, in line with the national requirement to work with our primary care network colleagues, so the groupings of GP practices, around the preparation for those primary care networks to identify appropriate sites to deliver the vaccine once that becomes available. So Ed, Helena and Colin and many of the members of the team done very active work with the general practice community over the last week around confirming to NHS England the initial premises which should be available to be used by general practice to deliver the vaccine. Running alongside that, there's consideration around what you might term mass vaccination centres may look like, and there's also ongoing work around the potential appropriate use and role for community pharmacists in delivering the vaccine. So in summary on that issue, it's fantastic news. It gives hope for all of us, but there are still many questions remaining to be answered about when the vaccines will be available, all of the clinical issues associated with them, the logistical issues and so on. And I think it would be worth reflecting that it will clearly take time to vaccinate not just the highest risk population, but then subsequently the broader population. So we cannot afford for anybody to have in mind that we're out of the woods with this pandemic. We are not. And we need everybody in the general public, all of us, to carry on observing all of the good practice around face, space, distancing, hand washing, etc. The last thing I want you to reflect, and then I'll stop, is that we're clearly within the kind of range of a second peak impact from the pandemic, following the first peak in March, April and May. The numbers in hospitals here and nationally are not at that level, but they clearly have increased. But the positive is that we are in a better position to withstand that second peak than we were through March, April and May. So by reflection, the testing and tracing system may not be perfect, but it's heavily being geared up and is delivering benefit. There's very substantial PPE stock, and PPE is widely available to everybody who within the health and care sector that requires it. And there's been enormous clinical learning. For example, Colin and others may want to come in as and when needed, but obviously the breakthrough around dexamethasone, the impact of other immune modulators, the impact around the use of appropriate antivirals, remdesivir, etc., the learning around the importance of high dose anticoagulation, the improvements in the way that care is delivered in critical care, position of the body, use of oxygen, and so on. So although we are still in a very challenging position, and there will still be many members of the community, sadly, that will have an adverse outcome from this pandemic in lots of different ways. Because of those clinical improvements, because of the logistical PPE improvements, the track and trace improvements, and so on, again, there is some cause for optimism. So the pandemic's still very much with us. Sadly, it's going to be with us for quite some time to come, but we are in a stronger position, and we should all be very hopeful that the vaccine potentially will begin to roll out relatively quickly, and that there's very good preparation within the NHS to support that, albeit it will be a major clinical and logistical undertaking that will take some time, even once it is available. I'm not really wishing to raise any other issues about impact on other services. Of course, there are workforce issues, staff absence issues, and so on, but they're all very well addressed in other forums. So that was all I was going to cover today, Chair. Happy to pick up questions. As I said, others, perhaps particularly Louise, Ed, and Colin, may wish to add on some of those issues if appropriate. But I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Peter, as always. And actually, there is a comment on the chat from Louise that she can add a couple of things from this morning's Health Protection Board. So I'll bring you in first, Louise, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I don't have a hand. So just some sort of additional points. So I suppose, first of all, reflection on the Health Protection Board, that the lockdown isn't achieving what it intended to do. And I know that's obviously been rehearsed somewhat in the national press, and that we are all obviously waiting a review of the next steps. Indications, obviously, that one of the reasons for that is nationally. This is nationally. There's about a 20% compliance rate with the self-isolation requirements following test and trace. So in other words, obviously individuals just not adhering to the guidance. And in relation to the PHE data that we receive, again, a point that it's now just been refreshed and it's been linked now to preferred address as opposed to NHS number. And that obviously doesn't necessarily significantly impact on Cumbria data. But obviously, I'm sure colleagues will be aware that from the university perspective, it will have an impact. It does reflect a little bit in terms of our South Lakes data, but as I say, hasn't materially impacted on numbers. And the final point in relation to the care home settings is that currently there's 28 outbreaks in Cumbria, and 16 of those in North Cumbria. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. Appreciate that. Was there anything else from anybody else that wanted to either raise a point or ask a question? Again, put it on the chat if you haven't got a hand. I'm not seeing any hands, but that might be down to me. But anything from anybody? Okay, Deb.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Peter, but also say, how good the partnership working has been with the NHS and the local authority and the voluntary sector. I think it's been quite impressive and has made a difference to the outcomes.
Okay, thanks for that, Deb. Anything from anybody else before we move on? Peter, you're back on.
Briefly, apologies, Chair. I should have said this earlier. When I referred to the issue about the primary care network potential centres, actually Ed Tallis is having to finalise a submission to NHS England literally while we're speaking. So that I think Ed hasn't been able to join us until he completes that task. But that's an urgent thing that must be done today. Yeah.
He is here, Peter. That's quite useful. I was going to Ed. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Is it hot off the press, or is it one of those things
just apologies for being a bit late in? Apologies for being a bit late into the item. I caught the end of Peter's presentation. The only thing hot off the press is just the scale of this. It's going to be probably approximately 6 times the size of the flu vaccination programme, just to give it some perspective, which by the end of February at the moment, we're looking at needing to vaccinate half of our North Cumbrian population. So just to give it some perspective in terms of size of the task, it's pretty huge. And at the same time, the vaccines are still in development. They've not been authorised or licensed yet or signed off by the MHRA. So there's still a changing daily picture on this at the moment.
Thanks, Ed. Okay, is there anything from anybody else? Right. Okay, I'm going to shift this on. Again, thank you very much for that. Those updates from colleagues. Giles, I was going to do this, but I wasn't going to do it if there was a load of decisions to reel off, because I'm conscious that I want to move an item for Suzanne. But I know normally you keep saying to me there's been no emergency rules or decisions made under emergency rules. Is that still the case?
Yeah, John, I was just going to say that is still the case, so you can do this quite quickly. But I think it's also just important to say, given perhaps some of the things that have been in the press over the last few days, that ever since we've been dealing with COVID, we've had an incident management team, and in terms of any decisions we take, we make sure those are properly documented and recorded and in line with the rules.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Charles. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to just skip a few items here because I'm just conscious that Suzanne Hamilton, who's going to do item 11 for Cumbria Learning and Improvement Collaborative, has not got a bigger window of opportunity as some of us have got today. So I was going to shift you up the agenda, Suzanne, and ask you to give us your overview of your 6-month update report, which obviously was circulated to colleagues for Cumbria Learning and Improvement Collaborative. Go ahead, Suzanne, and welcome.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so this is the 6 months report. So it's April to September from CLIC. It's a slightly different, it was a bit strange writing this report because normally we'd be updating on all the programmes, but of course, the first 3 months of this financial year, we were in the real midst of the pandemic. So what we did was we cancelled everything as non-essential work for CLIC, and all the staff were redeployed to other areas supporting frontline services. So what we've done for the first 3 months is just to do a bit of a summary of what the team were doing, but I've used the new CLIC evaluation framework as a way of doing that. So this evaluation framework is how we will be evaluating all the CLIC programmes. And what we know is that people mostly learn through experience. So 70% of learning is through experiential learning rather than just the classroom. So what we found when we evaluated as a team the work that our members have been doing was we found that actually they had learned a lot during their time while they were being redeployed. So it had been quite challenging for them because they were suddenly working within new teams, in new organisations, in new roles. But what it did do, it gave them the opportunity to apply some of the approaches, tools and techniques for change management and improvement that we talk about in CLIC firsthand in the work that they were doing. So overall, even though it was very challenging and they worked extremely hard, often weekends on some areas, they actually found it quite a beneficial experience. And I think that's probably fair to say that's probably happened for a lot of staff who've had to work in different areas, that it's been challenging, but actually there has been some positives. So from July, when I came into post after picking up from Stephen Singleton, we've been working to re-establish the programmes, and all the programmes are up and running, but they look different. So where we have been able to, we've moved our learning offer online. So there's a lot more being delivered via Microsoft Teams. Where we feel it's essential to deliver face-to-face, such as the coaching skills, we have risk assessed and we've reduced the numbers to take into account the social distancing measures. So the programmes are up and running and they've been established now to March. We've been providing other work to the Integrated Care Partnership too. We've been providing some leadership development and organisation development support to the Integrated Care Partnership Leadership Board and the CCG. And we've been also helping to set up the programme of work around workforce, which is sitting under the People Plan that was published in July this year and is linked to the Integrated Care System of North East and North Cumbria. So that work is now up and running, and there's a workforce collaboration group leading that work forward now. So we've also been working with 17 people from across the partnership, from representatives from different organisations, just to look at the CLIC programme for next year, 2021-22, and probably into 2023, to refresh the programme in light of the North Cumbria Health and Care Strategy and the light of COVID, and also in the light of the changes that are being proposed through the People Plan. So we now have a draft programme for next year, and that will be going to the system executive team in December. And that's probably the main points that I wanted to make, but happy to take any questions, John.
Okay, thank you, Susanna, and again a personal thank you from myself for the support you've given me in my relatively new role as the Integrated Partnership Chair, so I do appreciate that. Okay, any questions or comments? Carol, I saw your hand go up and then it's disappeared. Is it, do you want to ask a question or make a comment? Carol Green, no?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Oh,
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. I'm sorry if my internet goes in and out, Suzanne. Suzanne, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report. It's really, really helpful and great to see like the way in which the team was able to shift gear and support COVID so effectively. Thank you. One of the questions that raised in my mind when I was reading the report was to what extent you've been involved in or will be involved in capturing the wider learning from COVID, because I do understand that you have been capturing some of that. I think there's an email address or something that people can send ideas to. But in terms of the way in which we were going to be working wisely, more productive, differently across the different parts of the NHS, you know, primary care, you know, CHOC, hospices, care homes, wherever, community services, mental health. Just wondering how that's shaping up and what, you know, what your ideas would be for developing that and then utilising it in the future in terms of both CLIC's programmes and also the wider way in which we work in the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So yes, so some work has been initiated through John actually to try and capture the learning from the partnership in North Cumbria. So each organisation has captured the learning from COVID, and that's fed into the phase 3 planning process. But we haven't pulled that together as a partnership yet. So during November, I've been gathering information. I'm still waiting for, I think, one report to come in, and I'm going to pull the themes together. But I think what I've learned so far is that everybody's done it in a slightly different way. So people have their own approach to it. What's coming through is people have looked very much around how we deliver services, you know, using the technology more. We're learning or capturing less on how we work together as an integrated care partnership. So I should have the initial feedback by mid-December in terms of the themes that run across. I think it'll be possible to gather the themes, even though we've done it in slightly different ways. We did discuss it at the Integrated Care Partnership meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we have been tasked with putting a proposal for potentially capturing the learning across relationships and organisations, and that will go to the December system exec meeting as well. So in summary, I guess we have captured the learning, we have implemented changes, we will get some learning as a partnership, but I think there's still much more to do. And I think for a Cumbria Learning and Improvement Collaborative, there is something about taking more of a standard approach to how we gather information, so it's much more easier to assimilate that information and make something more meaningful as a partnership. Okay, thank you,
Suzanne. Thank you for the question, Carol. Is there anything else from anybody?
John, it's Mandy.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Mandy. Yeah,
it was along the similar theme, Suzanne, but obviously in the SEND improvement work, one of the themes that's coming through, particularly from education, is children with autism and the impact that COVID has had on them. And actually what our parent carers are telling us in the SEND programme is that their children are actually a lot less anxious, particularly during wave 1 when they weren't expected to go into school and they were getting their education remotely. We've also heard from health partners that actually things like attending a CAMHS appointment for their mental health, again, they're much more likely to engage remotely than they do face to face. And I just wonder whether I suppose it's a question for the ICP, whether the knowledge of that is being captured as well in the analysis of COVID, because I think certainly schools will be starting to think maybe differently. I know there was a huge anxiety at the Children's Trust Board that when schools did reopen, that some of these children might actually refuse to go into school. So I suspect people like Dan Barton and his colleagues will be starting to capture some of that information. But it would be good to get some of the learning for that, because obviously it impacts on health as well. I spoke to a psychiatrist today, in fact, just this morning, who said that one of the types of cases that he sees where he has to prescribe antidepressants is for children with autism, and quite often it's because of anxiety around going to school. So there are implications on health as well for the COVID learning.
I'm not sure, Mandy, whether we'll capture that kind of learning in this first phase, but we do need to be capturing it. So I'll certainly link with you in terms of the themes that are coming out to see if any of that is being captured. But I think there will be learning from how we learn or don't learn, I think, from this piece of work. So I'm quite looking forward to analysing those themes.
Yeah, I was just going to add, thanks for the question as well, Mandy. I suppose what we're relying on within the work that Suzanne's doing on behalf of the ICP is we're relying on organisations and or people providing information so that we can, you know, link them together. So again, I just echo probably what Suzanne said. If that's what's coming out, then Dan, maybe just to do something through the local authority to make sure Suzanne gets it, and at least we can see where that impacts on this initial report as well. So I just echo that back, really. That it's great to get it, because we need them to work it out. Okay, thanks very much. Is there anything else from anybody before I move? No. No, thank you, Suzanne. Thank you very much. And I know it's been a relatively short time for being sort of leadership of CLIC, but again, I reiterate, thanks very much for all the work you're doing in a really difficult time time for everybody. But, you know, appreciate what you've done and what your colleagues have done as well. Okay, thanks, Suzanne.
I'll take that back to the team. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So we're going to move on to item 6, which is the Chair and the Accountable Officer report. Mark, you're going to take us through this, and then we'll open it out to any specific questions or comments from anybody. So I'll hand over to you, Mark.
Thanks, John. I will take it that everybody's read the report, but you will also see that many of the items have already been covered. So I think we've already had a pretty extensive conversation about the COVID-19 update, so I won't go into any further detail on that. We've also discussed about vaccination, and I think it's an indication of just how fast things are moving. When we put together this report, we weren't in the same place in terms of our understanding about having to mobilise for a possible COVID vaccination programme when we put together this report. So things are fast moving there, but I think that we have covered pretty much the COVID vaccination perspective. We did talk about the flu vaccination update. I think nationally it's been a great success in terms of the levels of vaccination that we've done, and the challenge has obviously been a very significant one in terms of flu. But I think, as Ed alluded to earlier on in the conversation, the COVID vaccine challenge is another magnitude in terms of the expectation about the requirement for vaccinating half of our population by February next year. You'll see also, though, in the report, we did make a response about winter plans. So while all of this work is going on, we continue to work with all of our partners across the system in terms of our winter plans. A lot of that discussion is focused around our systems exec, where all of our organisations, local authority partners, NHS, come together to talk about a lot of operational things. Included in that is winter plans. We are also including in those discussions the discussion around testing and upscaling testing in our organisations as well. And that conversation goes across primary care and secondary care as well. And we are discussing there not only about how we deal with winter, how we deal with workforce issues during winter, but also how we can work together to support one another through what might well be a challenging winter period. In terms of some of our meetings, annual general meeting that we have every year. It's the first time that we have held a joint annual general meeting with the annual members meeting with our North Cumbria Trust colleagues. I think it was a particularly successful event. The meeting lasted an hour. We answered a lot of questions that had been submitted to us by the community. And it also gave us the opportunity to thank all of our health and care staff who have not only worked so hard, but also continue to work so hard under the very challenging circumstances that we have. And we also made the point, and I think that it is worth reiterating, just thanking everybody across North Cumbria, all of our communities who live and work in North Cumbria for the support they have shown, not only in terms of the NHS, but also in terms of lockdown and trying to do everything that they can to suppress the virus. Final thing from me, in terms of funding, we had a psychological support fund grants have been awarded to 5 of our North Cumbrian charities, supporting those who are particularly struggling with the impact of the COVID pandemic. And £180,000 was created as a fund by the CCG and Cumbria County Council, and it is held by the Cumbria Community Foundation. And we have bids there which are tackling things like the impact of anxiety, isolation and bereavement. At the time of writing, we had reviewed and a total of £79,700 had already been awarded, and there are details in the document about where they had been awarded. Sorry, there was one other issue, one other item for us that we wanted to talk about, and it was also about the Helpers Here collaborative work that's been going on between the NHS, Cumbria County Council and the third sector. And that work has culminated in the development of a Help is Here leaflet, which is being delivered to every home in the county. And what that does is it provides information about practical sources of trusted information on a range of different issues covering things like well-being, hunger, debt, mental health, etc. And it's about really trying to encourage anybody who might be struggling to find help. One, to find where to go and the best places to go. Secondly, to seek help sooner rather than later, which I think is particularly important in the current climate. We also have new members of the governing body, and we have 3 members, and John alluded to this at the start of the conversation. Dr. Gareth Coakley, who is our Chief Clinical Information Officer, Helen Horton, who is our GP lead for commissioning and clinical lead for health pathways, and also Ed, who John alluded to earlier on in the meeting. Just in terms of work with colleagues outside of the CCG, and in terms of just trying to understand more about the effects of COVID, and this probably follows a little bit on from the discussion that we've just had with Suzanne. The Health Watch Corona survey reported back its 3rd version of the survey in the summer, and we've given a link in the document as to where that can be found. And it's providing very useful information about how people feel about the impact of coronavirus on their lives and well-being. And that not only helps us in terms of understanding about planning for services and planning for things like that kind of document drop that we've been doing, but also just helps us understand in terms of our own employees, because a lot of the people who live in Cumbria are also employed and work within NHS and care and voluntary and care services as well. So lots of useful information in that, and I would certainly commend people to have a look at that if they have time to get some of those highlights. So I will leave that there, John. I'm very happy to take questions if I can.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I see, Charles, you want to make a point or a question?
Yes, please, John. And it's not necessarily a question for Mark, but I think it's perhaps one a number of us might just want to have a bit of a think about out of the meeting. But I just thought I'd perhaps raise it before someone else does, which is just to do with the grants awarded by Cumbria Community Foundation. So I think this is an excellent endeavour, just from an observation about those who've been successful so far. They look how can I put it, quite geographically specific towards perhaps one part of our county. So it's just really to ensure we work with the foundation, perhaps to encourage bids across the piece, so we can aim the money to those with the most needs, rather than necessarily those voluntary organisations that are good at writing bids. But that's just a sort of memorandum item rather than a question. Okay,
thank you, Charles. I was just before we move off that, Peter, I don't know, is it? I know we've alluded to 180 there. Is it knowledge that there's any more funds available for this, based on a conversation we had there, or is it not released yet in terms of, should we say, whether we have it anymore or not?
Yeah, I can't confirm, John, whether the additional resource has been provided yet, but there's strong likelihood that there will be more money put into that fund. And I'll pick up with the CCG colleagues who are working with the community fund on the issue Charles just raised. I'll pick it up outside the meeting. It's a good point, Charles.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, Deb, you wanted a question?
Yeah, it was just to say there is actually a typo which makes it look even more geographically. So Together We is actually an Allerdale and Copeland group, whereas it says supporting people with mental health in Carlisle.
Right. Okay. So that's wider than, yeah, it's West Cumbria based group. Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Thanks for that. Carol, you've got your hand up. I don't know if it's an old hand. Oh, it's not. It's the consistent hand. Go ahead.
Sorry, I tried to take it down and then put it up again. It didn't work. So just a couple of points. Thank you, Mark, very much for the report. I just want to reiterate your comments about the annual general meeting. And obviously to mention, it wasn't just the first time we had it, collaboratively with the trust, but it was also the first time it was held online, I believe. Certainly,
yes, absolutely.
It is. And I just wanted to make a special mention. You said that we thanked everybody, and it was a great opportunity to do that. But I do want to just flag up that I think that Julie and team did an excellent job, and all the speakers, because I was basically just a participant like everybody else on that day that joined, and I was really impressed with the professionalism and the clarity of everyone that spoke, in terms of the way that the questions were answered, and also in the way in which the whole event was orchestrated and chaired. So I just wanted to mention that, and hope we can jointly minute that. I think it was an excellent event, and I just want to thank everybody involved, but particularly Julie and team, for pulling it together. That was the first point. The second point was on the new members. I wanted to welcome everybody, and not just John, but add my welcome, and to mention something that John and I spoke about earlier in the week. I think with having new team members and having to work in this remote way, it's quite tricky to get to know you and say hello. And I think it's important that as a governing body that we actually are a cohesive team. So if there's any way in which we can plan in some kind of getting to know you session and find out a little bit more about each other, and look at how we work effectively as a team going forward through the next period of, the next year is going to be really tough, and we need to be working together as the strategic body for the CCG to do this. So if we can plan in some time together to actually relate to each other as individuals and as a group, I would really appreciate that, because I've never met you, Ed. I've seen you on the screen so many times. I'm very happy that I've met Helen several times, but again, I haven't met Gareth, and none of you have met me. So, I think it's important that we recognise that we're not just here to be fun, to do a job. That's very important, but we also have to be effective, and in order to be effective, we need to get to know each other a bit. So we'll just put a flag up for that kind of process to be built into our plans going forward. Thanks.
Carol, just thanks for that. And just so you know, since we did speak, I have spoken to Mark, and I have spoken to Suzanne about trying to support us through that, and particularly maybe looking at the next development session coming up in December. So work in progress. So it's, and again, I know you raised the point, and I thought it was a very valid point when we used to say. So we'll see where that goes, and hopefully have something for December. Even if it has to be on this format, it has to be, but we can do it in a different way. Okay. Thank you for that. Is there any other questions on the report or not before we move? Okay, right, thanks. I'll move us on. And it says for item number 7, it's Peter. But Peter and I have a chat, and he's got this ability to delegate upwards. So thank you, Peter. It's going to be me, but there's a reason why it's going to be me rather than Peter, because between myself and Brenda, we were the ones who, should we say, started this off really, and it does link back to what you've just mentioned, actually, Carol, about the introduction of new governing body members. So I know governance doesn't float everybody's boat, but it's really important that we follow, you know, what we should be following in terms of our constitution. And I think you'll recall at the last meeting we explained that there would be 3 new members, as you've alluded to. The Constitution allowed us to take on board the GP members without any changes to the Constitution at all. But unfortunately, in terms of Ed's post as the Director of Primary Care, it didn't allow us to take on that post as an officer member in terms of the Constitution. So I outlined to people at the last meeting that we would have to go through a formalised process with our Council of Members, which for everyone's benefit who doesn't know, it's our 39 GP practices. And we have a full Council of Members meeting tonight, straight after this meeting. So what you've got before you here really is one is the process that we need to do to approve Ed to go on to the governing body and the changes that need to happen to the Constitution. And also as a result of when Brenda and I did look at the Constitution, we'd already had in place the fact that we had a registered nurse on the governing body, and you'll see on the report where that figures. Our registered nurse post is taken by Louise, and Louise was already on the governing body, but we had to do some tidying up to the Constitution just to echo the facts and give us the flexibility that the registered nurse post could either be somebody who wasn't one of our staff, or it could be somebody who was one of our staff, hence why you see on there the fact that the changes that if you're watching in colour on the papers are in red, that outline the changes that we need to make to the Constitution and the standing orders that underpin those. So the first one about the registered nurse was a bit of tidying up that we needed to do, and also give us that flexibility. The second one is to actually recommend. So the first one's an approval. The second one's a recommendation to our Council of Members tonight. And some papers have already gone in advance to this. We have already, how should we say, approved Ed's post on the governing body. We just need to make the changes to the Constitution. So tonight I have to then go and take these changes plus a recommendation that they're happy that Ed would go on the governing body. I hope that makes sense, because it can be very complex in terms of some of the detail. But I think what we're trying to achieve is tidying up with the Constitution and making sure that the Council of Members will hopefully support us in approving Ed as a member of the governing body for us. So I'll kind of leave it at that, because we have discussed it as well at the last meeting, and this is what I said I would go and do and do this tidying up and get the paper done. So it's just in terms of what people, any comments or not before we shift into the actual approvals process and the recommendation. Okay, that's fine. So just in terms of the first one, which is approve the minor change, I just need to say a proposer and a seconder. Ed, you won't realise this, but at the beginning of the meeting, I did explain that you couldn't vote in this because you're still not a full member of the governing body until after the Council of Members hopefully gives their approval. I know that sounds strange, but that's where we are. So just I saw a thumbs up from yourself, John. I take it that's you as a proposer. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And Deb, you as a seconder. Is there anybody who disagrees with the approval there for the changes and the recommendation that we take forward? No? Okay, so I'll take this forward tonight with the full Council of Members and explain to them what we're trying to do, and hopefully it should be straightforward, because again, I can only echo that in terms of Ed, it will add something to the governing body, particularly in relation to the primary care side of things. We've strengthened as well with the GPs. So, okay, thank you for that, and thank you as well, Brenda, for all the work you did on that with myself, just to try and do what we thought was something quite sort of straightforward. It did get quite challenging for us at times, but you did very well. So thank you for doing that work, Brenda. Right, I'm going to move on to the next item, and actually, I just noticed there as well that Colin, he did warn me about this. He's got something in terms of the medical directors that he needs to go and attend to across the system, which I know is a piece of work he's been heavily involved in. So, Colin, thank you, and we may see you later on. If not, we'll, I don't know if we'll finish the meeting in an hour, but we'll try my best. So, just in terms of, we're now going to see live on screen one of the people that I mentioned earlier on, which is Dr. Gareth Coakley. And Gareth is our Chief Clinical Information Officer. And Gareth's going to give us an update on the information technology, and it's something on a sort of personal thing that we've been asking for, and another governing body been asking for time. We did get an update from a colleague, not one of our staff. We did get an update from a colleague back in January when we were over at Salterbeck, and this is sort of Gareth who's now picked up this mantle for the CCG, and he's going to take us through and give us that where we are with our digital improvements. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Gareth. Welcome, and I'm sure that everybody will enjoy what you're going to say to us.
Thanks, John. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
I can, if you can see it. If you want to put it on slideshow to make it bigger, that may be useful, if that's okay.
Let's have a little look, see if the technology will let me. Yeah, can everyone see that okay and still hear me?
That's fine. I've got it as a full screen now, Gareth, so that's fine. So hand over to you. Okay.
So I'm going to give, I'm probably going to upset John because I suspect I'm going to make his very good timekeeping up to now go slightly wrong. So I'm going to give a brief update about digital. There's quite a lot of information here, so I'm sorry if it feels a little bit rushed. On Carol's point, the first bit I'm going to do is a brief introduction to me, then talk a bit about what was planned to happen this year, what's currently happening, a bit about money, because we all like to know where the money's coming from, a bit about bids, and a bit about looking ahead. So I'm Gareth, GP, came up to North Cumbria to take up a job at the infirmary as a house officer, and basically haven't escaped since. And unlikely to now, since I married a Longtownian girl, so I don't suspect going anywhere. My role with the CCG is CCIO, which is a bit different from the CIO role that Mark would have talked about in January. I don't really understand the bits on the left of the screen very well. They're computers and technical bits, and I know they exist. I know vaguely what they do. No idea how to fix one. We have people that does that. I sort of, at least partially, know how to deal with sick people and what goes on in the consultations and the conversations that happen in surgeries. So my job is really about making the digital side of things, the informatics side of things, work for the clinicians using it to make patient care better. And in many ways, make it so they hopefully don't even think about what they're doing in terms of the computer, it just happens. So the plan for 2020, which would have been talked about in January from Mark, was about the Windows update, Windows 10 upgrade, the primary care hardware refresh, Office 365 upgrade, mail migrations, community health pathways, Great North Care records, cyber security updates, and then a virus hit, and everything sort of changed. And it wasn't even a computer virus. We can't even blame someone for opening the wrong email. And the problem is COVID came along, but in some ways didn't change anything, because actually all of the work streams that were needed to be planned needed to happen anyway. It just changed how they were done. And a lot of the numbers being touted around, in certainly national, is that a lot of the changes that were planned for the next 4 or 5 years happened in about 4 weeks at the end of March, beginning of April time. So there was an awful lot of change, but a lot of the routine work still had to happen. So the Windows 10 hardware upgrade is currently underway and is probably the biggest digital work of the year. Was due to start in April, but obviously got delayed fairly significantly. There was £400,000 secured in last financial year for it, and a further £750,000 has been secured in this year to fund it. It's changing every single computer across all 50 plus sites of GP surgeries, along with upgrading the Windows system, upgrading the associated system. So that is approximately halfway through being rolled out at the moment. There has been some issues with it, not least of which is when we tried to put in the order back in early March time, the factory in China that was producing it closed because it was in Wuhan. So it did delay some supply chains. There's been some problems with self-isolation due to COVID, and even some of the technicians being off sick due to COVID. And there have been some issues about compatibility, which were identified at an install stage and has caused some issues. But generally, most places are happy. These are some of the comments we're getting back from practices. Everyone happy with a new setup, hearing from the team that things are running quicker. So it's nice to hear some positives that this money is doing the right things in difficult times. As part of the immediate response to COVID, my team managed to find £200,000. And I say my team because actually when this was all happening, I was actually in Egypt waiting to come back on the last flight on holiday when COVID struck. They managed to get £200,000 and purchased about 120 laptops from EMIS Anywhere. These are 4G enabled laptop with data plan that provide secure access to the EMIS clinical system from anywhere, so without local network. And every practice currently have access to at least one of them. The vast majority have access to several of them. It's only the tiny practices that only have one, and they were distributed on a sort of practice patient list basis. Online consultations became very prominent first thing in the year. There's a variety of systems being used across North Cumbria now, iPlato, EMIS, and eConsult being the main ones. Every practice has access to at least one and is using at least one. In a straw poll, just some data I took a few weeks ago, there was 1,400 patient contacts via online consultation via eConsult, and that's used by about a quarter of our practices. So you can sort of extrapolate the figures out. And from a patient point of view, I've actually used eConsult contacting my own surgery, and I find it very, very useful and very friendly to use. Video consultations was very quickly rolled out in March. They were occasionally being used prior, but suddenly there was a rapid change to video consulting. Since the start of COVID, there's been nearly 7,000 video consultations in primary care. Peaked in about the first to second week of April and has fallen back a little bit since then. But that's actually more because clinicians have started getting used to the modality of video consultations and realizing what it's best used for, because sometimes a video adds very little. AccuRx was, or Chain SMS is what also goes by, was being used to an extent in practices before COVID, has come on a lot more since then. Allows the practice staff to send patient-specific text, so to the individual patient, rather than a group text. You can attach NHS leaflets, you can give them website links in it, you can attach the medical notes to it. You can also send them a link so that they can send pictures back or any other documents back. And to date, there's been 150,000 patient-specific texts sent out in the last 6 months. 21,000 response links were sent, and over 4,000, well, nearly 4,000 images have been sent back by patients to their GP to aid the consultations. Oh, sorry, my screen's frozen. As part of the COVID response, nationally there was GP Connect and COVID Clinical Assessment Service, also known as CCAS, was rolled out. These were part of national contractual changes for GP surgeries. So as a result of that work, and particularly the work primaries have done locally, there are now appointments on every single GP surgery for NHS 111 to book patients into, if that's an appropriate outcome. There's telephone appointments on every surgery, so the CCAS service, the COVID Clinical Assessment Service, can book patients in for GP follow-up or to arrange face-to-face assessment. There were issues with its initial rollout on the national side. The guidance wasn't great. Primaries have worked absolutely brilliantly to facilitate this and actually produce some of the guidance and national standards which are now being used for NHS England and NHS Digital. So promoting our North Cumbria bit. Care home tablets are being rolled out. We agreed some funding in the very early stages to pilot some of this, and now of course there's national rollouts of tablets and iPads to care homes. CHOC are kindly enabling some of the support around this, and this is allowing for both the GP's contact with the care homes, but also for things like Attend Anywhere, so patients from a care home don't need to go into the hospital for their outpatient appointment. These are coming soon, a lot of them. I think there's another 51 been approved in the last couple of days and will be arriving shortly. Microsoft Teams have also come widely on the scene, being used widely in North Cumbria now. Can be used for clinician-to-clinician contact for discussion, but also being used to, like we are today, with the meetings, the admin, the support roles, and around the CCG, saving tens of thousands of miles and allowing people to keep working when they're self-isolating. Helen Horton recently ran a PLT education activity afternoon on Teams, and there was nearly 500 people attending a series of educational sessions across the region on things like menopause, contraception, online consultations, which was very positively received. More recently, and this has just been in the last few weeks, funding available for what's called Digital First Primary Care. The ICS released 2.7 million across the ICS, and we were successfully in bids for £279,000 of that to fund 4 separate projects, which I'll discuss on the next pages. The Sound Doctor is not yet launched, but will be very soon. We actually had a meeting this morning about planning the launch. It's a series of bite-sized films around chronic conditions that's really easy to understand, really informative snippets of information about things like back pain, dementia, heart failure, aging well, living well, to try and enable people to care for themselves a bit better, and also enable the clinicians to signpost to a trusted, useful information. This is an example of one of the videos, which I won't actually play because of time limitations, but I know Brenda's going to circulate the links so everybody can have a little look at it if they want. So that I think will be a really positive coming in the Christmas New Year period. We also got some funding to buy further webcams, headsets, monitors for the dual screenings to increase the efficiency and effective working styles. Also money to get video cameras to use in training practices to help support learning of junior doctors and GP trainees, so that they can learn their consulting styles and receive feedback. Health pathways, which I sadly can't claim credit for because this really is a Dr. Horton project, but that's gone live recently, and the funding will help promote health pathways even further across the system. There's already 79 pathways live, I'm informed, and there are dozens more being worked on and hundreds more coming. Really connecting up system working by by the work of the clinical editors, working with the experts in secondary care. And it's promoting that best care for everybody, so everyone's getting the same service. The additional funding will help move that forward even further. The Digital Champions is another great thing that's come about this year. In every surgery, we've got a digital champion, not necessarily a clinician. It may be the practice manager, it may be the receptionist, anyone who's got that ability to champion the digital elements. We managed to secure nearly £100,000 of funding to help support that, so that they can have more time out of practice, to be educated, to develop further, to take more of these skills back into the surgeries. We've also engaged with a company called Redmore Health. They do a lot of work across Manchester and are actually based in the south of Cumbria. They work around education and teaching people how to use things. So they've already given 252 primary care staff online sessions about how to make use of things like Microsoft Teams, how best to do virtual consultations, how to best utilize the online consultations. And they'll also do one-to-one support with any member of staff about any specific issues. And they've been engaged until at least the end of March, and I'll be really positively received in helping the surgeries. There's some bigger ICS things. The Great North Care Record is now launched in the North East and the North Cumbria, although there is less use over here because we're still in contract with a MIG currently. The information being shared across the system more seamlessly. The next phase of this is the patient engagement platform, which will let patients via apps, via online tools, manage their registration, manage their data preferences. These phases are sort of the plan over the coming years, essentially. The hope and joy, which probably makes no sense to anyone, but if you ever get a chance to watch this video, and I suggest you do go to YouTube, there's a video called Hope and Joy. It was made by the Newcastle University hospitals about their rollout of the patient engagement portal, and it's about how the two different journeys of a patient receiving paper notes and one using the online tools, and how that journey can be very different. It's a really, really interesting 3 or 4 minute watch. And locally, we are a little bit behind where Newcastle is at, if I'm honest, but it just shows what's possible and what is coming, and what we can get to if we're working together. There is Resource Publisher coming, which is a way of sharing information across practices. There's more Great North Care Record and patient engagement platform things coming. There's likely going to be more funding we can bid for coming out in December. There's the Digital Clinical Council, which is being set up by Michael Smaley to work across the system, which is a real positive out of COVID. It's really got clinicians wanting to think about the way they use digital rather than going, oh God, it's digital. So I think that's aiming to get GPs, the likes of myself and Helen, along with secondary care, mental health clinicians, all working together to try and get that integration so it works seamlessly. There's lots of technical bits going on as well, which I leave to clever people that know what they're doing. We're migrating domains from University Hospital Morecambe Bay. We're moving servers from Morecambe Bay up to locally for the GP estate, try and sort migrations out to locally controlled servers, move to NHS Mail, implementing Office 365 in the next few months. So that's a very brief, very quick overview, and I appreciate there's lots of information there, but happy to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you, Gareth, and what a fantastic presentation to give us that amount of information in such a short space of time. And
yes,
very well done. No, you weren't rushed at all, Gareth. I think that you hit the mark exactly for what we need to do. So spot on. Thank you. So I know there might be a few questions or comments. Deb, you're the first one.
Yeah, just to reiterate, Gareth, what John said, I think that was a really clear, concise, fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. My question is about digital champions in secondary. Should each specialty have a digital champion?
Oh, I think it would be absolutely brilliant if they did. Absolutely. I'm not quite sure how it would work, and I'm not quite sure where the funding will come for, because obviously I link in much more with the primary care aspects. It's certainly something I have mentioned at digital care boards before. Sorry, my doorbell's ringing.
Someone is at the front door.
Someone's at my front door, apparently.
You're digitally enabled there, yeah.
I am. Do you like how digital I am? It is something I mentioned at the digital care board before, and I'm happy to raise it again at the digital care board, because I do think it's done wonders for digital in primary care, and it gives us a link into every practice, and almost like an informal discussion group between us all. So actually people fire off emails going, oh, I'm just having this little problem, and it just makes the practices work quite well together, because what's happening in one practice, another practice may already have solved. And often it's not the big thing. It's not the.
I'm sure a lot of secondary care physicians, all this digital stuff has come since they did all their training, and so I think a lot of them are really nervous about it. And you know, if you look at just the simple uptake of video consultation, it's really poor in secondary care.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, it sounds terrible, but in some ways COVID was good in that way, because actually a lot of the people who were going, oh no, I don't want to, it will never work, oh, we can't do that. You know what? They just didn't have a choice, and they had to do it, and they've sort of gone, you know what? It was okay. It worked. So they were sort of forced into it without anyone having to force them into it, because they had to because of COVID.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. Are you okay there, Deb? Yeah, I'll go see that Denise has got a hand up. Denise, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Gareth. That was really, really interesting, and actually extremely positive. It's quite exciting, some of the innovation that's going on. And I think, as you hinted, I guess one of the positive things of COVID is it's kicked us up the arse a bit about getting digital into lots of areas of life, and particular medicine. I think my only question is, as we go through this journey and some of those really exciting things that are going to be carrying on, will we keep an eye on and the profile of people that are using it? Because we've talked about helping clinicians, etc., and Deb's mentioned secondary care and some of the not uses there, but we need to make sure we're not leaving any patients out, that we don't have any digital deserts geographically or by age, etc.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's really important to make sure that as many people that want to are able to use it, and that's one of the things we're possibly thinking about in terms of, is there a way to bid for a bit more funding and maybe get Redmore to help, not just with the surgery's use of technology, but actually lay on some things for patients. And also there's some patients that do not want to use technology, and we need to make sure that they can still access the services they need to access. You know, it's all very well going, oh, here's a brilliant app and this is how it works. But you know what, if the patient just does not want to engage with using an app, they still need to be able to do it another way. I mean, the example I would use is, if you go back 20 years, you used to queue up in the railway station to buy your ticket. And I remember, you know, doing that when I was at uni, and there'd be 20 or 30 kiosks there serving people. Now there's one, because 99% are bought online, but you still need to make sure people can still buy their train ticket if they need to, if that makes any sense.
It does, Gareth. Thank you. I'm going to just introduce a few more people in a minute, but I just wanted to comment from Mandy, really, about she wants to have a chat with you about supporting people with learning disability or dementia, just about how they can access in terms of some of the products you just spoke about there. So I'll leave you to have that conversation outside the meeting, Mandy, if that's okay, with Gareth. Just I was going to pass on to just some hands raised from Charles first, and then Mark.
Thanks, John. I'll just be very brief. It's just to add to the points that have just been made. I think I read somewhere either this week or last week that 20% of the population don't actually use the internet. So that, just to add to what Gareth's point is, we need to make sure that while there are lots and lots of benefits through all the things we said, we shouldn't be leaving those people behind, because I would bet there's quite a high correlation with sort of vulnerability with those groups compared to those who don't use the internet. So just to support that point that Gareth made.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Mark?
Thanks, John. Gareth, that was really helpful. Thank you for that. I'm just wondering, does it warrant any more formalised approach to research about the use of it, and particularly with our public and patients, about acceptance, barriers to using it, and all of those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is going on nationally.
Right.
I'm not sure how much of it is happening on a very local ICP or PCN type level. And I do think it's worth exploring who's engaging with and who's not. It is sometimes always a bit of a moving feast, if I'm honest. There's suddenly the next new disaster to move on to, sometimes in digital, and it does feel quite reactive at times, particularly over this year. But yeah, I think over the next year it's going to be a case of exploring actually what's good and what's not so good, and what we keep and what we get rid of, and how can we make the things that are good better. And quite frankly, there'll be some of it that we look at and go, why the hell did we spend money on that? It's completely naff. Now we've got it in place. And at the time, it was the right decision to make, to do it, because it was, you know, there was potentially a case need for it, and it all moved very quickly. But we need to figure out which are the best bits, and what is not.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, Mandy, you've put another comment on, but I'm going to ask you if you want to just sort of articulate that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, I mean, Gareth's kind of almost kind of made a suggestion that we could build on further, but I think, it sounds like Redmore are having a really good impact, and maybe linking them up with relevant agencies like People First and Age UK, or even Health Watch, might be a good way forward, so they can share their kind of expertise together and come up with a solution.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very, very sensible, Mandy. And in fact, Mandy, I know me and Kaylee have put a meeting in your diary with Redmore about the safeguarding side, so it may well be worth something to have a chat about then.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Good timing.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Again, just thanks, guys. There's just a few comments on here about linking in with Health Watch, and also as well with some of the universities. And I think there may be things, you know, in terms of just looking at what resources our communities using. And I think there's all lines of inquiry there, without a shadow of a doubt. It's a question of trying to connect those things up. And I don't know whether Gareth, Julie, just in terms of your connections, say with Health Watch, or again, even also as well with some of the universities in some of that patient experience stuff that you're starting to develop. Is that something you think you could maybe link in with Gareth on, and just try and create some kind of bridge to those things? Julie, are you there?
Absolutely, yeah, I'm here, and I'm very happy to do that. And I kind of link in with some of the Great North Care Record work with Gareth as well. So I'm very happy to make links with some of our wider partner organisations.
Okay,
yeah, that'll be brilliant.
Yeah, and just as I was going to mention it, and I know we've primarily concentrated there, Gareth, on primary care. I know that Ed's picking some things up there about the wider ICCs in terms of the partnership working, and you've touched on the Great North Record, and again Health Pathways, which Helen is leading on. Are there anything, if I was thinking of this from the perspective of us as an integrated partnership working with social care, secondary care, and wider third sector organisations, is there anything that's being done to try and join some of those things up, Gareth, at the moment, other than the ones you've mentioned? Or is it, are we, I'm not saying we're in silence, because we're not, but I'm just interested.
Yes, there is. I mean, there is, Graham Putnam is the CCIO for NCIC, so he'll cover anyone in NCIC, although I appreciate his time is limited. So he's the me of the trust, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It does get a bit grey in terms of my role and where it impacts on secondary care, because I don't necessarily have a direct. I can still advise and discuss, but I don't necessarily have the power to move that much, because that then falls to Graham. I certainly all the allied services, the councils and stuff like that are all on the digital care board. I mean that involves the entire health and social care.
Right, so that's the board chaired by Michael Smiley from the trust.
Yeah,
and that's a kind of cross the integrated care partnership with some of the key partners there. Right. Okay.
Yes.
That's useful.
CNTW council is there. ICC members are there. Okay.
No, that's useful. I'm going to bring Charles in, and I was just going to finish off with a point on where we might get some support of Mark's. Go ahead, Charles.
It's just to respond again and support Gareth in that. I think the one area, if those of us who were there when we did get the presentation, probably 9 months or so ago, from Mark Jones, just to remember, as a health economy, I think we've been fortunate, possibly through the benefit of national funding initiatives and the like, that probably our primary care services just inherently are much more digitally, can't say that right, enabled than secondary care. And I think what we shouldn't forget was the point that Mark was saying, is there's a lot of work just to bring, if you like, the foundations, certainly in the hospital sector, up to a level that enables the technology that I understand even less than Gareth does, but that has to be at a certain level in order to get the benefits of all these add-ons that we can work as a system. So I think there's lots of great work. I think everyone's trying to do that, but it's a bit like the moving everyone to Microsoft 10. A lot of us just in the CCG still on Microsoft 7, and we can see perhaps when we try to do things that the computers that we use aren't as functional as the ones we have at home, just in terms of doing things like accessing information on the internet and things like that. So there's a huge amount of work here that we should not be denigrated in any way, but I think it's just important we reflect there's still quite a lot of the basics and the foundations that we need to address as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Charles. And I'll just finish off just a couple of points. Again, one from Mark around that there might be some applied research collaborative funding available to help with any research work about the usage and that. So that was another point again that you can maybe talk about. That's through sort of the universities and through the ICS as well. And again, Helen talking about expanding the health pathways, and that links in the third sector and the ICCs. And Gareth, just a question, which has been answered. Yes, that CHOC are on the digital care board. Great. So that was a question from Deb. So you've got that answered in the chat. Right. Again, fantastic, Gareth. There was half an hour of time, very, very, very well spent in terms of updating us where we are, and I'm really, really appreciative of that. And I know you put a lot of work into that presentation. And we thank you.
No problem at all.
Well. Yeah. Appreciate that. Is everyone happy to move on from that? Yeah. Okay. Right. The next two items again are probably governed to the items, and the more they are for information to people, and I shall do both of these because I'm involved in them. But the first one is the North Cumbria Integrated Care Partnership governance framework. You've heard us refer to this a number of times during the course of today's meeting around the ICP, as it were, the Integrated Care Partnership. What you've got there is something that was approved at the last meeting of the ICP Leaders Board, which I chair, which outlines the governance framework for how the partnership is going to work, who some of the members are, and just I wanted to make people aware that in terms of expanding the membership, I've now got a member from the University of Central Lancashire and a member from the University of Cumbria, a member as well from the Local Enterprise Partnership, and also as well a member from Active Cumbria, which is a kind of health well-being sort of physical activity type work that goes on in Cumbria, normally done through the sort of public health local authority. So it's trying to widen that membership as we try and concentrate more on prevention health inequalities once we come through the pandemic. So what you've got there is a series of documents, really, which is basically the governance framework, the sort of structure chart, and you've got terms of reference for both the leaders board, the one I chair, and also as well the terms of reference for the executive group for the ICP, which Lynn Simpson from the trust chairs. So it's just to note those, so because they have been approved, and make sure you can see them. Now, Amanda, you've got your hand up, so I'm going to let you. Oh, sorry, you got your hand up for the question on this, or were you just referring back to the last item? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
no,
go
it's
ahead,
just
Amanda.
it's quite relevant, John, really, to yourself, really, and you've probably already thought about this, but currently we're doing a lot of work, particularly in the safeguarding arena with the police. So obviously domestic abuse is something that's very much in a lot of our minds at the moment because of the increasing incidents across locally and nationally. But also the police are starting to do some amazing work around changing their model of policing. And we've heard some great stuff that they're doing around trauma-informed policing, starting in the Barrow area, but now starting to spread into North Cumbria as well. So I just wondered whether or not you'd had any thoughts about whether or not it would be timely to start including them in the membership of an ICP. It might not be the right forum, but I just thought, you know, we're having so much more interaction with them now, whether now is the right time to have that conversation.
They're already on. Sorry, Mandy, I didn't mention them in my verbalisation of who was members. They've been on for about 6 months. Chief Constable Michelle Skier attends, and those sorts of things that you just mentioned there are ways that we need to link in with them, because some of it was around mental health was maybe one of the links for us. But actually, I also know that they operate hubs as well in each locality. And I know we have hubs in the ICCs. I'm not saying that they can work together, but there might be some connection with some of those things. So Michelle's there. Her membership might change to one of her colleagues, but I think I'd be really interested in trying to get input from other organisations as a bit of a, this is what we're doing, and what I'm hoping it would create is where people go, oh, that's interesting. We can see the connections now about what we could do with that. So, which I think is exactly what you're saying. So be reassured that she does attend at the moment. Yeah. Charles, you've still got your hand up. Is that a question, or was that right? An old hand, I think. Right. Okay. Happy with that. Just in terms of you've got the documents there. You can see how it operates. Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm going to then move on to the next item, which is again something which I chair, which is the Northern CCG Committee Terms of Reference Work Programme and Annual Report. Again, this was signed off, and there's reference made into some of the minutes of the Joint Committee, which we receive as well. It's just for your information. But one thing I did want to say is, finally, we've agreed the work programme after a lot of time and effort to try and do it. So you'll see within the document there, the work programme for the Joint Committee, where there's been sort of the delegated responsibility to the Joint Committee for some of those decisions. One is around the Joint Commission of Breast Diagnostic Services across the integrated care system area. So bear in mind, this Joint Committee covers the current 8 CCGs that we do have in our North East and North Cumbria ICS. The other item is the Joint Commission of Cardiology and Specialist Neuro Rehabilitation Services with NHS E and NHSI Specialised Commissioning Team. The other one is the development of value-based commissioning and individual funding request policies across the ICS. And the other one is the receive updates from the North East and North Cumbria Prescribing Forum, and also to receive updates on plans for rheumatology services in the County Durham, South Tyneside and Sunderland ICP, and the links to there. So basically, that's, so you've got those to know, and that's what the work is that's being trying to be done within the Joint Committee. And again, we do receive the minutes of those. So it's just to note those. Is everybody okay with that as well before I move on? Yeah, okay. So we've already had item 11, from Suzanne, and I'm going to now hand over to yourself, Louise. You've got item 12, which is the quality update. So over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So I'm assuming obviously everybody has read the report. I suppose just to reference that the quality report is under constant review and refinement. First of all, I suppose to reflect our expectations from a CCG point of view. Our role working with other commissioners and regulators, NHSEI and the CQC, and bearing in mind, I think some of the national expected direction of travel from the National Quality Board. So what you see here is an executive summary. The main report, there is a main report attached to this, which is discussed in detail by the Quality Outcomes Committee, of course. I suppose just in addition to what's referenced in the report, so from NCIC's point of view, we are expecting the publication of the CQC report early in December. There is now a patient safety and risk committee, which is particularly focused on the areas of improvement around the CQC action plan, but latterly it has very much got a focus on the impact of the discharge and flow challenges within the trust, obviously exacerbated by the COVID outbreaks. In relation to that, while that's being monitored on a regular basis, so I suppose just some positive traction. As of Wednesday, I think there were over 100 what we class as medically optimised patients waiting for discharge in the trust. There was a piece of work led yesterday by a number of senior managers and execs, particularly around what we call Pathway 3 patients, those that are actually needed onward support into residential or nursing care, and 24 of those, as a result of that work, were actually moved on out of the hospital. So it sort of reflects the huge and coordinated effort that we're making around hospital discharge, for which there are clear governance processes in place. I also just wanted to highlight, obviously in relation to healthcare acquired infections, I know there's been some questions raised around the C. diff rates in the hospital. So these were reviewed as part of our IPC report to the governing body. And that just reflects that during the first 5 months, North Cumbria were assigned 50 cases against a trajectory of 43. And NCIC were assigned 26 cases against a trajectory of 25. So just to update the governing body that there is a deep dive underway to review our intelligence. There is a review of the increased use of antibiotics in the hospital due to COVID, and we're sort of looking for support from PHE to provide us again with that wider intelligence, but you know, understandably that they're a bit challenged in terms of that support offer at the moment. So the CCG are leading sort of monthly meetings around all the infections, but that's just to update and provide a bit of additional assurance in respect to that work. So I just want to add, the team are currently leading some focused piece of work regarding in a number of areas. So in particular, the impact of COVID in relation to the cancer pathways, in respect of learning around some the end of life themes and incidents, that despite all the COVID restrictions, we have started virtual work for commissioner assurance visits to those with learning disabilities and providers, and we're supporting a joint approach to a quality framework with the council for our independent sector providers. And finally, some patient journey work, again in support around the safety and quality of those on all of the pathways that I mentioned before. And finally, I'm just really pleased to inform the governing body that we have now appointed an IPC nurse in the CCG, which is hugely welcome. in terms of the work supporting the CCG and primary care. She's very experienced, and even though she only started with us on Monday, has been quite instrumental in supporting the assessment around the COVID vaccination centres. So just a really positive note to end on. So I think that's everything from me, John, unless there's any questions from anybody. Thanks.
Okay, now I was just going to sort of maybe ask yourself, Carol, if there's anything you wanted to add from your role as chair of the Outcome and Quality to add to what Louisa said there or not?
Just to support everything that Louisa said, and just to reiterate that we are on a bit of a journey in terms of using our reporting mechanism to be more of a quality assurance tool going forward. So we had quite a detailed conversation earlier in the week, and we're going to be doing some further work on taking a bit of a step back and having a bit of a strategic look at how we take assurance, quality assurance in a kind of a broader, more kind of holistic way, because a lot of the constitutional standards and the things that are measured take a very kind of granular look at quality. And we want to start to think about, not just start, to continue to think about quality in a more system-wide way. And this will be in line with the new quality strategy for the NHS, which isn't yet published, but will be. So we want to get ahead really in terms of the thinking. We know what the themes are. They're going to be coming out of that strategy. So in the new year, I'll be supporting Louise, who'll be, I think, leading some of that thinking. I don't know if that's all okay, Louise, or you want to add anything to that. Thank you.
Okay.
No, that's fine, Carol. That's exactly what we agree.
Thank you, Carol. Any questions or comments from everybody? And I know we have discussed some of these issues earlier on in the meeting as well, particularly around some of the COVID stuff. Are we okay to note that? Okay, right. So thank you everybody for that. We'll move on. Going on to performance report, Charles. That's yourself.
Thanks, John. I'll hopefully be relatively brief for a couple of, a number of reasons actually. I think the first one is just to say many members of the governing body, members of the Finance and Performance Committee, and we had quite a big discussion about some of these issues yesterday. So there's a degree of familiarity with them. I think the second one is actually to link with Louisa's report, and one of the observations that Louise and I have sort of been sharing notes on over the last couple of days is actually come on to some of the specifics in a minute, but the key areas of risk in terms of performance are actually probably pretty much the first three red items on the report Louise has just done. So I think one of the things we probably need to work at as a CCG is, while it's really important we look at those things, we do it perhaps in a slightly more coordinated way. And part of this comes from the fact we're doing everything remotely. But as we move into the next financial year, perhaps look at, can we do some of these things in an integrated way? So we're looking at performance and quality, and indeed some of the resources at the same time, because they all link together. I think that the other thing I would just say in introducing this is going back to, I think it was the beginning of August. It's just worth noting that was when the phase 3 letter was issued, as it's called, which was actually very much about, having got over the first wave of COVID, the NHS needed to demonstrate that it's still open for everyone else. It's not just dealing with COVID, and it's really important from today, as this is a meeting held in public, that everyone remembers that. But also, as the challenge of COVID appeared to be abating somewhat, there was a lot of work to do on the catch-up, and that is particularly evident in our patch on achieving the referral to treatment standards, and indeed on some of the cancer work too that comes out in Louise's report. And particularly in there, I think it's important to highlight work is ongoing to understand the clinical risks associated with those patients, and just not the sort of numerical processing, which is not a very pleasant way of saying it. So I think it's important that we remember these aren't just numbers, these are people with very real conditions, and it's important those things are done. Certainly on referral to treatment, we'll come perhaps onto it on the next report, the finance report. As a patch, the trust have identified this as a big issue and have set aside funds to challenge this in the latter part of the year, looking at expanding capacity where possible with COVID, looking at opportunities to work with other providers and the national independent sector contracts to use capacity. The one bit that is interesting actually is during the COVID spell, and actually we've seen it now in the last few weeks, is although throughput in the hospital is quite challenging, the numbers are lower than usual of people presenting at the hospital as unplanned admissions, and that's on the basis that the work the ICCs have done over the years, in last couple of years, in reducing those or maintaining them at a level where the rest of the country was seeing increases. And there is going to be some more work coming on stream to help us manage winter, including some support to the 111 service of introducing a daytime clinical assessment service that CHOC are going to be providing, again, for people to access. Also interesting in terms of performance, the handover issues. I think at the last meeting I reported there being a concern in August. There had been some quite long waits, I think, over a particular weekend. Those seem to have abated. In terms of averages, both sites were pretty much on the 30-minute standard over October, so that was a positive. And a colleague from NWAS this week on another meeting remarked that ambulance performance against the constitutional standards, North Cumbria is in fact the best performing patch in the whole of the NWAS territory, as it were. The other issue I was just going to flag up is actually at the beginning of the report. We've mentioned before about the issue of prescribing for dementia patients of antipsychotic drugs, and a bit like Louise has just mentioned, we're very pleased that Helena Gregory has joined the CCG as our new lead for medicines optimization. She's done some investigative work in that, and is sharing the findings with a number of clinical colleagues to work out what is actually driving this. Is it a prescribing issue, or is there actually another issue below this that is manifesting itself in prescribing patterns? So I'll just leave it at that, if that's okay, John, unless there's any questions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Charles. Questions or comments? And I know there's a number of my colleagues spent some time on this, as Charles has said at the meeting yesterday. Anything from anybody? Yeah, and I think I would only reiterate what's already been said in terms of the links between the performance and the quality side that Charles raised, and I know Carl's raised with it. I'll cover that in a minute about what we're going to do. But actually, it is we know that a lot of we say challenges are being faced by NCIC at the moment with COVID, but also as well not just through COVID, through some long-standing things that we know we need to work with on to improve, and we've got to try and manage that as safely as we possibly can, which I think is the points that were being raised earlier on by Carol and by Louise, and hence why we do that safety as part of that quality. Just as regards the links to crossovers between quality and performance, again, Carol, I did have a conversation with Mark this morning just about trying to bring some of that within that development session, just to see how we can maybe improve that. And I know Charles alluded to that as well. So it sounds like we're going to have a big development session, but it won't be massive in terms of time or anything, but we'll start to focus on some of these things and see what we can do about how we respond And I know Mark had some ideas around that as well, so we can pick those up and start the discussion. So I do really appreciate the comments that people have made about that. But again, the priority for us is we know some of these things are not going to disappear overnight that have been raised in this performance and the quality thing. The main thing is we've got to work with our providers to ensure that we can get the best quality service we can in a very, very, very difficult environment at the moment, in more ways than one. So is there any final comments before I move on to the finance?
John, just one I would add, and it's just to say, I think as part of that development, and we're looking at what our key strategic priorities are, which a lot of that is linked to the quality and performance of our local services, is to use that and that work to link in as we refresh the corporate assurance statement in terms of how we as a governing body are addressing our strategic priorities, is also to use that process to inform that. And we'll hopefully be bringing the updated version of that to the governing body in January. So it's just to remind everyone we haven't forgotten about it.
Very useful, Charles. Thank you very much. I can feel the session developing already. Okay, just in terms then of you're on again, Charles, with finance, and again, like you say, this was mentioned just today, but I shall let you. Just sorry, I've got a. Who's is that MD? Sorry, I don't know if that's a member of our governing body, is it?
No, it's a member.
Mahesh, stop, Mahesh. I'll introduce. I'll do the item 17. Okay, no problem. Okay, just in terms then of the finance, Charles, just to hand over to you.
Thanks, John. And again, there's been quite a lot of work done on this in the Finance and Performance Committee, where we had quite a long debate about some of the issues. So, but I think it's just important to sort of bring out the key points. So, the CCG, along with all NHS organisations, was asked to put together a plan for the second half of the financial year based on what we thought we would spend. And we did that work as an integrated care partnership in conjunction with our colleagues at North Cumbria Integrated Care Trust, just for everyone's benefit. For the way the NHS works, although we have lots of other partner organisations who we deal with, like CNTW and NWAS as two big ones, for the way the NHS finance works, they're not in our integrated care partnership, so it's just the two organisations. We put together a plan of how much money we thought we would need to spend to address the challenges we face over the rest of the financial year, which we did, and we've been probably refining that since early August. In September, allocations were announced for all the NHS to see how much money would be available for the second part of the year, and unfortunately, the money that we think we'll need to spend, and we're doing everything we can to manage that effectively, but and this comes about addressing things to make sure we take sensible and proportionate decisions, but we still need to meet the challenges of service that we've been talking about earlier. And there's a difference between the allocations and the money we have. We have made some reference on the paper that it does appear out of the growth money. It could be argued, although it has been technically proven to us that the calculation is correct, we seem to have lost out about that because it's a net figure about challenges and efficiency. Just for everyone's benefit, that hasn't changed our plans at all. All that means is the difference between the allocation we've got and the money we intend to spend is bigger than it would have been if we'd got a bigger slice of that pie. So we put that plan together, and we've reported on the October position, which, bearing in mind the plans were finalised, and we're working very closely with the trust and our partners in NHS England and the ICS to do all this. Lo and behold, October's figures are actually very similar to the plan. So that's where we are. We are anticipating getting the hospital discharge programme funding for the costs we incurred in April, and those funds aren't included in the plan. And going back to the position in September, because I'm conscious it's a while since we had a governing body, so just to confirm, in the first part of the year, the money that we've been spending, that has actually been greater than, I'll call it, the COVID allocation we got, or the allocation to cover our expenditure during the first 6 months of the year because of COVID. And there's been a top-up system in place that means the money we've actually spent, we've up till August we expect to get September's, we're covered. And the final bit I would just like to note in terms of the proportionality of this is, if you look at the money that we spent compared to our allocations, which we got top-ups for in the first half of the year, and that's nearly 9 million, and we're saying that the underlying difference between our expenditure and our allocation the second half of the year is about 10. So it's not massively different, and that in the main is due to 3 issues. One being the costs of packages of care, which were growing towards the end of the last financial year, but cost allocations are based on what happened at month 9. The full year effect of those hasn't been reflected. We have had significant prescribing growth, particularly at the first part of the year. Probably some of that is linked to COVID. And the third bit is there is an acknowledgement that because of this national allocation progress, we have lost out in terms of the money we've been allocated. So that's really where we are. I appreciate it's a pretty much a whistle-stop tour, but just bearing in mind we have had quite a lot of discussions both at governing body and finance performance committee over the last few months on this, and indeed at the system leadership board this position was also discussed in terms of the integrated care partnership in a meeting in public too.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Are there any questions or comments from members of the governing body? No, and I say it's not a, you know, like we can't say it's 100% healthy, but I think what Charles has tried to do is explain the challenges that we faced in terms of what's going on with COVID and how that funding's worked out and what this may or may not mean for us as a CCG. But we shall continue to go on this track and aim to provide the services the best we can with the finances that we've got for our community, particularly as we're going through this winter phase now as well, and we know that we are in the middle of the second wave of COVID as well. Okay, thanks for that, Charles. So I'm going to move on to sort of quite quickly through some of these. The next sections are really about the minutes of various committee meetings, receiving them, and some from the wider system before I move on to questions from the members of the public. So first of all, finance and performance, there's 2 meetings there on the 18th of March and the 19th of August. As chair of that group, I've got nothing to add in terms of pulling stuff out that I think is relevant to us as a governing body. So if people are happy, we just accept those. The Outcomes and Quality Assurance Committee, again, Carol, I was going to ask you, is there anything particularly you want to add to those 2 sets of minutes for June and August? You don't have to. No, thank you. Minutes of the wider system. Northern Joint CCG Committee to receive is the 10th of September. The only thing I wanted to add in my role as chair of that group is one is just to say you'll see the appointment of 2 lay members there from across the integrated care system. One is called Jeff Hurst, who's actually in Newcastle and Gateshead, and Jeff actually is responsible for finance and governance for this CCG, and Michelle Thompson, who's from South Tees, who's in our Tees area, who's in relation to public and patient engagement. So they've been appointed. The other thing was I was sort of reselected as the chair, and obviously the other bit and within those minutes was about the work programme, which we've talked about in the terms of reference value, which we've talked about at item number 10. So I've nothing else to add on that. Then the other one there for the Integrated Care Partnership Leadership Board, again, 1st of October. Again, the only thing I would add is that the main bit from those minutes was about the formation of the governance framework, which again we've had on the agenda item. So I don't want to say any more than that about those. So I'm going to go on to questions for the members of the public, and just if I'm not incorrect in terms of who we've got, I think we've got Liz, Mahesh, and Susan from my reading of the participation. What I was going to do is I do have a number of written questions that were submitted by some members of the public. So I'm going to I'm going to paraphrase some of them, but also as well, some might go out by way of a written submission, others we might want to answer here and now. But the two areas, we had a question from Leslie Carruthers from West Cumbria, and the point about Leslie's question was one in specifically about the quality report, about the complaints procedure, where we'd signed it off at the quality report at point 17 as green, meaning it was okay. And it was in reference, she was saying, to the withdrawal of the one-stop breast clinic from West Cumbria Hospital. Now, I know Leslie's been heavily involved in this with colleagues from West Cumbria regarding this ongoing, should we say, reduction in service for the West one-stop breast clinic at the hospital after it was stopped in May in line with what was happening with coronavirus. There's ongoing consultation with the West Cumbria Forum in terms of some special meetings about this, which is being led by the Forum, but also as well, should we say that Rod Harpin from the Trust has personally taken responsibility for feeding into that particular forum. And he did so on the 27th of October. But there's a couple of things. One is we will send a response back written to Leslie, but the specific issue about the complaint was quite technical, really, is that I shouldn't, as chair, sign off the green aspect of the complaint episode because he'd submitted a complaint to us in relation to this. This was passed to North Cumbria Integrated Care Trust, and not dealt with by us. So basically it was passed to North Cumbria, and who Leslie says did not respond in the stipulated time frame, etc. So all I was going to say that we will send a written response back to it, but I would have to say is in terms of the technical detail of why we're coloring our report green is because I don't want to get too technical, specifically because it wasn't a complaint that we would deal with. It was a complaint to the trust. So we will get in touch with the trust as well and pass that information on. And we'll also pass on the current position from the trust in relation to the situation there. The other one was Leslie asked. She kind of noted within the work programme for the Northern CCG Joint Committee. She noted the work ongoing there in terms of breast services and diagnostics, and she said she was pleased that there was this work being undertaken. I have to say at the moment it's getting underway rather than specifically in train and being done. But she also wanted to make sure that within there that the breast services and referred it back, of course, to the clinic at West Cumbria Hospital about making sure that we took on board the fact that the issues of any issues of maybe movement from the hospital and the costs going across to any other hospital apart from the West Cumbria one. So again, we'll respond back and say thank you for the comments in relation to that. There was another question from Annette Robson and also as well from Christine Warrior, which they're kind of both linked. And they were on behalf of the We Need West Cumberland Hospital Group, and you could say it's to do with the elective surgery. And within there, they were talking about some of this surgery. In their view, we've been told that it's total hip and knee replacements plus some foot, shoulder, and hand surgery was moving from West Cumbria to Carlisle Infirmary. Question: is this true? The answer to that question at the moment is we shall find out more information on that, and we will respond accordingly, because to do so at the moment, we'll check it out. We'll get back a response as early as possible, because the bottom line on that is, for our colleagues, unless people have had some more information on this, and I'll probably specifically looking at yourself, Peter, is that we have no knowledge of this at the moment, and we'll look into it. Is that a fair response, Peter?
Yeah, I'm not aware of the detail of the issue that Annette's raised, so I think we will pick that up with the trust separately and make sure that we get a full and clear response.
Okay, right. Okay, with that in mind, as I did say, and I know Mahesh, you wanted to raise a point, so I shall ask colleagues who I think are in the meeting as well if there's anything they want to raise. But Mahesh, you've got first in there on the question you'd like to ask.
Thank you, John. Can you all hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you now. It's
Okay.
bit crackly at times, but it's
Right.
okay.
Now, the COVID is of course quite important, but there is an increasing concern about the general public about the other item, and particularly you have highlighted the elective orthopedic surgery, where I do have information that is going to be, they are in the process of discussion that transferring the elective orthopedic surgery to Carlisle. Now the question now is that if that is the case, what's the point having a Westcumberland hospital? We might as well have a cottage hospital.
Okay, so you're just reaffirming the same question that was asked by Annette in terms of what you believe to be the shift of orthopedic surgery from West Cumberland Hospital to Carlisle. Well, I suppose I'll go back to what Peter said. We will get a response out. And is it okay, Mahesh, if we send that response via Annette and
That's
Christine?
okay. That's fine. Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay.
Quite happy with
That's
that.
all right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that.
Was
there any other question? Was there any other questions from anybody else, from people who are present, that want to raise it? Sue, you've got your hand up. Thank you for using the technology. Go ahead. I shall let you ask a question.
Sorry, I haven't got the technology right. I've just got it right. Thank you. It wasn't a question. I just wanted to say what a very positive and determined team I've been in the presence of for the last couple of hours, despite all the challenges you've got. I'm really pleased to hear about the IT, Gareth, and I know there are challenges there still, but I do know something of your journey and all the complications of trying to join up the digital stuff. So just to say thank you very much. And I know the comms team will put out all these new things, particularly to do with 111. They'll all get out to the public somehow. And I also have your little leaflet already with all the information on, so thank you for that. So yeah, thank you everybody. It's been interesting and a pleasure to just listen in. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sue. Appreciate that. Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question before I close this part of the meeting? I think that's yourself, Liz. Go ahead. You know what I'm going to say, Liz, don't you?
Yeah, got it.
We can't hear you. There you go.
Yeah, I was delighted to hear about the IT and how all the GPs are now taking it up. Our practice was one of the first ones to do IT for patients, and I've been able to access my records digitally for a very long time, and it's really, really good. It really works. However, there is a slight reservation about the video conferencing and that sort of thing, in that I think that it does need to be monitored. I'm not sure that it's always a satisfactory experience, both for the person who is at one end of it, you know, the patient and the doctor and the clinician. And it's, again, it just needs some research work to make sure that that there aren't small glitches. The other thing, and somebody did bring it up, is that there is a large group of people who actually don't use IT. I did some local research recently and discovered that in the sort of 80+ age group, they don't even look at Facebook. you know, they don't do anything that way. So you've got to have it still in place, the old-fashioned way, telephones and meeting people face to face. But it was great to hear about that, and I'm delighted to hear that the GPs are now embracing it.
Yes, thanks for that, Liz. And I think when we did touch on that, I think Gareth recognised that as well, because that same point was raised around, you know, having a variety of different methods. And the other thing is, and I know we probably do need to do a little bit more research around what is going to be useful, but I know we've done some initial stuff that Julie did and reported back at the last meeting on this, and also as well, there is some interesting points about the use of the digital technology in terms of video conferencing within the Health Watch work as well, about some of the things that they found, but particularly the stuff that Julie and Christine Harrison did. But I think there's more to do, without a shadow of a doubt, on that, and to see how it works for people. One of the things they did find, though, was some people really loved it, or some people really just didn't like it at all. Oh, yeah. So there was there was a majority actually liked it, but actually the ones who didn't like it just didn't like it. It wasn't for them, and I think it wasn't like.
Actually, the other issue is, bearing in mind we're a rural county, is the access to the IT equipment. It's one of the issues that I have around the whole jobs thing, where they insist that you have to use IT to sign on and all the rest of it. Fine, if you can afford broadband. If you can't afford broadband, if you live in a rural area, you can't just nip down to the library and use the free facilities. So, you know, there are some issues about that because you've got a rural population. And of course, we then get into transport and things like that, but that's a side issue. It's the access to the broadband and the quality of the broadband, which is extremely patchy.
Yeah, as we know on some of our governing body meetings, I can assure you as well, Liz.
Yes, mine's very good, but compare. I know Carol's probably isn't nearly as good.
I think just to say we all fully recognise the point that Liz is making, that use of digital technology will not be for everybody. I think Gareth was very clear about that in the presentation, and Charles and others made the same point. Unfortunately, Liz, in some cases that will be for people who are already have got access challenges because of rurality.
Yeah.
But all we can do is provide the best options that we can and keep trying to increase and improve the routes of access, really. But we all fully recognise and endorse your point, Liz. You made it very clear.
Actually, one of the other things that can happen is that it takes people like me almost out of the system, because I can look at my records online and deal with it. I'm not ringing up to get results and all that sort of thing. I can just go online, see them myself. So the staff and the surgery can spend more time on the people who need the time. And I think that's something, you know, one has to remember.
Well put, Liz. No, and thank you again for your continued advocacy of these issues. I really appreciate it. I haven't got anybody else.
Driving for an hour and a half.
Yes. Okay, I haven't got anybody else. I'm just conscious we've got another meeting afterwards. I haven't got any other urgent items of business either. I just, the next item there is that the fact the date of our next meeting is the 21st of January. But I don't know where we will be in terms of getting together, not getting together, doing online, not doing it online. I'd just like to say a big thank you to the members of the public who have joined us today, because it is really, really appreciated that people take the time and effort to link into what can be at times very dry meetings, you know, with agenda and all that formality. But it does come alive when members of the public join in and challenge us, and our supporters as well. So we do really appreciate everything that you do there. So thank you for that. So just in terms of my governing body colleagues, we're scheduled to take the next meeting I've got down as 4 o'clock. I'm conscious that that's a long time away than normal. We normally have about 10 or 15 minutes. I was going to propose, if people are okay, that we start at 3:30 on the part 2 meeting, give chance for people to have a break. Is that okay for my colleagues? Yeah. And just to remind you, there is another link to the meeting for the part 2 for people to join on that. So I saw, Brenda, that you had your hand up. Is there anything you wanted to mention there that I've maybe missed, Brenda? Go ahead.
Not in terms of that, just wanted to say a very big thank you to the comms team for ensuring that we got live today for our members of public. So thanks Paul, thanks Kieran, thanks Julie for helping sort that out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for reminding me as well of that, Brenda, because I know there's a bit of work that goes on behind the scenes to try and get something like this going. So yeah, it's much appreciated. Okay, well, yeah, it was good and it worked, and well done, Paul. So I'm going to say we join up again at 3:30 in terms of the part 2, and I shall hopefully see people very soon. And if I don't see members of the public at the next meeting, obviously, but I hope to see you soon as well. Take care. Bye bye.